I stood in that courtroom with my hands trembling, watching my own mother point her finger at me and demand that I pay child support for a baby I didn't create. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My sister Shannon sat in the front row, 8 months pregnant, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while my husband held her hand like I was the one who had wronged them. Your Honor, Taryn has the financial means, my father said, his voice steady and rehearsed. She's the older sister. She has a responsibility. A responsibility for my husband's child, with my sister. The judge looked at me with something between pity and suspicion. The whispers behind me felt like needles in my spine. 26 years of being the family's scapegoat, and this was their final act, making me pay, literally, for their betrayal. But they didn't know what I had in my folder. They didn't know what I was about to say. One sentence. That's all it took to turn every person in that room against them. Have you ever been blamed for someone else's choices? My name is Taryn McCarthy. I'm 36 years old, a senior director at a tech company in Michigan, and for 18 years I've built a life far away from the family that made me feel like I was never enough. But some debts, the ones written in guilt and silence, have a way of following you home. I stood on my parents' front porch in Ohio, holding a wrapped box containing a vintage watch I'd spent weeks finding for my father's birthday. The autumn air carried the smell of dried leaves and something baking inside, probably Shannon's famous apple pie. My husband, Evan, had already gone in 10 minutes ago. I could hear his laugh mixing with others through the screen door. I took a deep breath before reaching for the handle. This had become my ritual, this pause before entering my childhood home. 18 years of living on my own, and I still needed a moment to prepare myself for what waited inside. The kitchen was warm and crowded. My mother stood at the stove while Shannon arranged flowers on the table. Evan was leaning against the counter near my sister, and whatever he'd said had made her cover her mouth to stifle a giggle. When I walked in, they both straightened up, and the laughter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. "Taryn, you're finally here," my mother said without turning around. "Shannon's been helping me all morning." "The house looks beautiful," I said, setting my gift on the counter. "Happy birthday, Dad." My father nodded from his chair in the corner, but his eyes were on the television. Some things never changed. I noticed Evan had left his phone on the counter again. He'd been doing that constantly lately, forgetting his keys, leaving documents out. I'd assumed it was work stress. Now, watching him move to stand closer to Shannon as she poured wine, I wondered if there was something else weighing on his mind. The swing set was still visible through the kitchen window, rusted now, unused for decades, but still standing. I was 10 years old when Shannon fell from that swing and broke her arm. I was supposed to be watching her. That's what my parents said, what they repeated for years afterward. If you had been paying attention, Taryn, if you had been more careful. Only Aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister, ever suggested otherwise. She'd pulled me aside at the hospital that night, her voice barely a whisper. "That swing was already broken, honey. The chain was rusted through. It wasn't your fault." But Aunt Ruth lived 3 states away, and her words couldn't compete with my mother's daily reminders of my failure. From that day forward, everything I had was supposed to be shared with Shannon. Every success was diminished because Shannon was still recovering, still fragile, still owed something I could never fully repay. At dinner, my mother made a show of displaying Shannon's handmade photo album while my watch sat unopened in its box. Shannon put this together herself. Look at the detail, the love in every page. She flipped through pictures while Shannon blushed prettily. I watched Evan lean toward my sister to see the photos better, his shoulder touching hers. They whispered something I couldn't hear, and Shannon's hand briefly touched his arm. When I looked directly at them, they separated quickly, both suddenly fascinated by their plates. "Evan, you should spend more time with Shannon," my mother announced, as if reading from a script. "She's been so lonely since her last relationship ended. You're like family." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water and heard voices in the dark living room. I stopped in the hallway, hidden by shadows. "You need to be more careful," Shannon was saying. "She's not stupid." Evan's voice was low, casual. "She trusts me. That's her problem." I stepped into the room. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the television playing on mute, pretending they'd been watching it all along. The next morning, I paused outside the kitchen, my bag already packed. My mother's voice drifted through the crack in the door, speaking to Shannon in that conspiratorial tone I remembered from childhood. "Just let her keep thinking everything is her fault. Like always. It's easier that way for all of us." I didn't cry. Something had shifted inside me overnight. For the first time in my life, the guilt that had been my constant companion went quiet, replaced by something colder and far more useful. Clarity. That clarity stayed with me during the 3-hour drive back to Michigan. It stayed with me when Evan climbed into bed that night without a word. And it stayed with me in the weeks that followed, as my husband slowly transformed into a stranger I barely recognized. It started with small criticisms, the way I worked too late, the dinners I missed because of conference calls. "You care more about your job than this marriage," he said one evening, his voice carrying a rehearsed quality that made my skin prickle. "I feel like I'm living with a roommate, not a wife." I listened without defending myself. Something had changed in me since that morning in my parents' kitchen. Instead of apologizing, instead of promising to do better, I started watching and documenting. Evan traveled frequently for his sales job, but I began noticing inconsistencies. A hotel receipt from Columbus when he claimed to be in Cleveland. A charge at a restaurant in Cincinnati on a Tuesday when his calendar showed meetings in Detroit. He started taking phone calls outside, pacing the backyard in the dark, his voice too low to hear through the glass. I created a folder on my laptop, password protected, and began saving everything. Credit card statements, screenshots of his calendar, notes about the nights he came home smelling like unfamiliar soap. My finance background had taught me the value of documentation of building a case before making any moves, so I built my case in silence. 2 months after my father's birthday, Shannon called me crying. I was at my desk when her number appeared and I almost didn't answer, but old habits die hard, and the guilt that had governed my life for 26 years made me pick up the phone. "Taryn, I'm pregnant," she sobbed. 4 months. I didn't know how to tell anyone. 4 months. I did the math instantly, my mind working even as my heart started to pound. 4 months ago was August. Evan had taken 3 business trips in August, all supposedly to the same client in Cincinnati. "Who's the father?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "He left me," Shannon wailed. "He said he couldn't be tied down. I'm all alone, Taryn. I don't know what to do." She didn't answer my question. I noticed that. My mother called within the hour as if she'd been waiting by the phone for Shannon to deliver the news. "Your sister needs help. You have the money, Taryn. You have the good job. She has nothing." What about the father? Shouldn't he be responsible? "He's gone. Disappeared. Shannon is devastated." My mother's voice hardened. "You're the older sister. You have a responsibility." There was that word again, responsibility, the weight I'd carried since I was 10 years old. I told her I needed time to think. What I really needed was more information. 3 weeks later, my parents arrived at my door in Michigan without warning. I came home from work to find them sitting in my living room with Evan papers spread across the coffee table. "What is this?" I asked, still holding my briefcase. "We need you to sign these," my mother said, sliding a document toward me. "It's a commitment to help Shannon financially through the pregnancy and after. Child support, essentially, until she gets back on her feet." I looked at Evan, expecting him to be as confused as I was. Instead, he nodded encouragingly. "It's the right thing to do, Taryn. Family has to stick together." "You owe her," my mother added, and there it was, the familiar blade she'd been sharpening for 26 years. If you had watched her properly that day on the swing, her life might have been different. She's always struggled because of what happened. This is your chance to make it right. I looked at the 3 of them, united against me in my own home. My husband, my parents, all agreeing that I should pay for my sister's mysterious pregnancy. The trap was so obvious now that I could see it clearly, but they didn't know that. They saw only what they'd always seen: guilty. Taryn responsible. Taryn, who would do anything to earn forgiveness for a sin she'd been told she committed as a child. "I need to review this with my accountant," I said. "I'll let you know." That night, after my parents left for their hotel and Evan went to take one of his private phone calls in the backyard, I saw his phone on the kitchen counter. A notification lit up the screen. Shannon's name followed by a heart emoji and the beginning of a message. "I can't wait until we can finally." My hands were steady as I picked up the phone. His password was our anniversary, the same one he'd used for years. He'd never thought to change it because he'd never thought I would look. I found everything. 2 years of messages between my husband and my sister. Love declarations, plans, details about how they would split my assets after the divorce, how Shannon would get child support from me because Taryn has more money than she knows what to do with. And then the message that stopped my breath, Evan writing, "Our baby will have everything, I promise. Our baby." I screenshotted every conversation, every plan, every betrayal. I emailed them to myself, then deleted the sent messages from his phone. My hands trembled as I worked, but my mind was ice cold. That night, I called a divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation for the following morning. Then I called Aunt Ruth, the only person who had ever told me the truth about that broken swing. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And I need you to keep a secret." 1 week later, Evan handed me divorce papers with a smug expression. He was asking for half of everything, claiming I had hidden income and emotionally abandoned him. He thought he was ambushing me. He had no idea I'd been preparing for war. The mediation hearing was held in a gray government building in downtown Ohio. I had agreed to have it there close to my family because I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them confident. Confident people make mistakes. I arrived early with my attorney, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in complex divorce cases. She had reviewed my evidence folder 3 times and called it one of the most thorough collections she had ever seen. "Your finance background shows," she told me. "Most people come to me with suspicions. You came with a prosecution." Evan walked in with Shannon at his side, her belly round and prominent at 8 months pregnant. My parents followed close behind, my mother's chin lifted with righteous certainty. They sat across from me, like a wall of accusation, 4 people united in the belief that I was the villain of this story. The mediator, a tired-looking man in his 60s, opened the proceedings by inviting each party to make an initial statement. Evan went first. "Taryn was never present in our marriage," he said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She worked constantly. She refused to have children. She made me feel invisible in my own home. I tried for years to connect with her, but she was cold, distant, incapable of real intimacy." Shannon spoke next, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "My sister has always resented me. Ever since we were children, she treated me like a burden. She never wanted to help me, never wanted to see me succeed. When I told her I was pregnant, she accused me of lying about the father instead of offering support. Then my mother took her turn, and her words cut deeper than the others because they carried the weight of a lifetime. Taryn never learned how to care for others. I tried to teach her, but she was always selfish. When Shannon got hurt as a child, Taryn showed no remorse. She has always put herself first, and this divorce is just another example of her inability to love." The mediator's expression shifted as he listened, his eyes moving to me with growing skepticism. I could see him forming judgments, building a picture of a cold career woman who had driven her husband into another woman's arms. Patricia touched my arm lightly. It was time. "If I may present evidence relevant to these claims," Patricia said, standing and opening a folder, "I have documentation that paints a very different picture." She began with the text messages. Projected onto a screen the mediator used for evidence review, the conversations between Evan and Shannon unfolded in stark black and white. 2 years of messages. Love declarations sent while I was at work. Plans made while I slept beside my husband. And then the message that made the room go silent. Evan writing to Shannon, "Our baby will have everything. I promise you." Shannon's crying became real now, not performed. Evan's face went pale, then gray. Patricia continued with hotel receipts showing Evan and Shannon checked in together in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis over the past 2 years. She presented bank statements documenting transfers from Evan to Shannon totaling over $12,000. She laid out a timeline that proved Shannon's pregnancy coincided exactly with Evan's supposed business trips. "This was not a case of a neglected husband seeking comfort," Patricia said. "This was a coordinated effort to deceive my client, extract her assets through divorce, and force her to provide financial support for a child fathered by her own husband with her own sister." My mother started to speak, but the mediator raised his hand for silence. His skepticism had transformed into something else. Disgust, maybe, or disbelief that people could be capable of such calculated betrayal. Then Aunt Ruth walked in. I had called her the same night I discovered the messages, and she had agreed without hesitation. "I should have spoken up years ago," she told me on the phone. I won't stay silent anymore. She took the witness seat with quiet dignity, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and steady hands. She looked at my mother, her own sister, and did not flinch. For 26 years, I watched this family blame Taryn for everything, Aunt Ruth began. It started with a swing set accident when she was 10 years old. Shannon fell and broke her arm, and my sister needed someone to blame. But I was there that day. I saw the swing before Shannon touched it. The chain was rusted through. It was broken before Taryn ever let Shannon near it. My mother rose from her seat. That's a lie. Ruth, how dare you? I told you the truth that night at the hospital. Aunt Ruth continued, her voice rising over my mother's protest. I told you the swing was defective, that Taryn wasn't responsible. But you wanted a reason to make Shannon the priority. You wanted Taryn to feel guilty, so she would spend her whole life making it up to her sister. The mediator called for order. My mother sat down, trembling with rage, but Ruth wasn't finished. Taryn is the most honest, responsible person in this family. What you've heard today from her parents is the same pattern of lies I've watched them tell her whole life. They have spent decades breaking down this woman, and I will not sit by and watch them do it in a court of law. The room fell silent. Even Shannon had stopped crying, staring at her aunt with something like shock. During the recess, I walked to the hallway for air. Shannon followed me, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Taryn. Her voice was small, younger than her 30 years. I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be like this. Mom always said you owed me. She said it so many times that I believed her. I thought I deserved what you had. And I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I had never let myself see before. A woman who had been shaped by the same mother, twisted by different lies. You're not my victim, Shannon, I said quietly. But maybe you're a victim too. I walked away before she could respond. The mediator announced the hearing would reconvene in 2 weeks for final recommendations. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun, my phone buzzed. A text from my company's CEO. Congratulations on the VP promotion. We'll announce Monday. For the first time in months, I smiled. That smile carried me through the next 2 weeks, through the final mediation session, and into the courtroom where my marriage officially ended. The judge's ruling was decisive. Evan's claim for 50% of our assets was rejected entirely. The evidence of his infidelity, combined with the documented financial transfers to Shannon and the proof that their affair had been ongoing for 2 years, destroyed any credibility he might have had. The judge noted that Evan had contributed minimally to our shared finances throughout our marriage, while I had been the primary earner. He walked away with only what he had personally brought into the relationship, which amounted to almost nothing. But the consequences did not stop there. During the divorce proceedings, my attorney Patricia had subpoenaed Evan's company expense records to verify his claimed income. What she found instead was a trail of fraudulent expense reports. Those business trips to Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis had been billed to his employer as client meetings. In reality, he had been using company funds to pay for hotel rooms where he met my sister. His employer launched an internal investigation. Within a month of our divorce being finalized, Evan was terminated. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved back to his parents' house in Pennsylvania unemployed and facing potential legal action for expense fraud. The man who had stood in that mediation room, accusing me of being cold and distant, was now living in his childhood bedroom, his reputation destroyed by his own choices. Shannon's consequences came more slowly, but they cut deeper. She gave birth to a baby girl in late January, alone in the hospital. Evan refused to be present, refused to acknowledge the child, refused to offer any support without a court order forcing his hand. The man who had promised that their baby would have everything had vanished the moment things became difficult. Shannon was forced to file a paternity suit, a public legal action that confirmed for everyone in our small Ohio community what had really happened. Neighbors who had known our family for decades began to whisper. Relatives who had always adored sweet, fragile Shannon started keeping their distance. The golden child discovered that her pedestal had been built on my shoulders, and without me holding it up, there was nothing left to stand on. She remained in our parents' house, but the house itself was no longer secure, because the truth about our family finances had finally come to light. For 10 years, I had been quietly paying my parents' mortgage. I had covered their health insurance, their property taxes, their car payments. I never mentioned it, never asked for acknowledgement, because I believed that was what a good daughter did. I believed I owed them something for the childhood guilt they had convinced me to carry. The month after my divorce was finalized, I stopped all payments. The first missed mortgage payment triggered a call from my mother, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Taryn, there's been some mistake with the bank. They're saying we're behind on the house." "There's no mistake," I said. "I've been paying your mortgage for a decade. I'm not paying it anymore." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she had hung up. Then came the tears, the apologies, the promises that things would be different. But even through her sobs, even through her declarations of regret, her first real question was always the same. "Can you send money this month just until we figure things out?" I said no. I kept saying no. Within 3 months, my parents were forced to sell the house where I had grown up, the house with the rusted swing set still standing in the backyard. They moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. My mother called me weekly, sometimes daily. Her apologies growing more elaborate each time. But I had learned to listen for what she really wanted, and it was never forgiveness or reconciliation. It was always money. In April, I received a handwritten letter with no return address. I recognized Shannon's handwriting on the envelope, the same loopy cursive she had used on birthday cards when we were children. I almost threw it away unopened. But something made me hesitate, some small voice reminding me of what I had said to her in that courthouse hallway. Maybe she was a victim too. The letter was short, barely filling one page. "Taryn, I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know something. My whole life, Mom told me I was special because I was fragile. She said you were strong, that you didn't need anyone, that you could handle anything. I grew up believing that everything you had was supposed to be shared with me because you could afford to lose it and I couldn't afford to go without. I was jealous of you, not for your money or your success. I was jealous because you always knew who you were. You had a center, something solid inside you that nobody could shake. I never had that. I spent my whole life being whoever Mom needed me to be, and now I don't know who I am without her telling me. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know one thing. You never owed me anything. You never did. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not thrown away, but not displayed. Perhaps someday I would know what to do with it. Perhaps someday I would be ready to respond. That evening, I sat down to write my own letter, this one to my parents. It took me 3 drafts to find the right words to say what I needed to say without anger or bitterness. I told them I did not hate them, but I also did not need their approval anymore. I told them that if they ever wanted to know who their older daughter really was, not as a source of money or guilt, but as a person, I would be willing to listen. Until then, I needed space to build a life that was truly my own. I sealed the envelope and set it aside to mail in the morning. As I reached for my tea, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message from a number I had not deleted, though I probably should have. Evan. "I know I have no right to ask anything, but I need to tell you something about Shannon, about how this really started. Meet me once. Just once." I stared at the screen for a long time. My finger hovered over the delete button, ready to erase him from my life completely. But I did not press it. Not yet. I waited 3 days before responding to Evan's message. Part of me wanted to delete it and move on to close that chapter permanently without looking back. But a smaller part, the part that still needed answers, won out in the end. We met at a coffee shop near my office in Michigan, a public place where I felt safe and in control. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't touched. He looked thin, older than his years, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy regrets. I sat across from him without ordering anything. "You wanted to tell me something, so tell me." He couldn't meet my eyes at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your mother approached me first, right after we got married. She called me one day and said Shannon was lonely, that she was struggling to make friends, that she needed someone to talk to. She asked me to be a friend to her sister." I said nothing. I let him continue. "I thought she just wanted us to be closer as a family. I thought it was innocent, but she kept pushing. She would call and suggest I check on Shannon. She would arrange family dinners and seat us next to each other. She would tell Shannon to call me when she was upset instead of calling you. By the time I realized what was happening, by the time I understood what your mother was building, I was already in too deep. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red. I'm not saying this to excuse myself. I made my choices. I could have stopped at any point, and I didn't. I was weak, and I was selfish, and I destroyed our marriage because I didn't have the courage to do the right thing. But I thought you should know. Your mother orchestrated this from the very beginning. She wanted Shannon to have everything you had, including your husband. I sat with his words for a long moment. They confirmed what I had suspected ever since I heard my mother's voice through that kitchen door, ever since Aunt Ruth testified about the lies that had shaped my childhood. My mother had not just failed to protect me. She had actively worked to take everything from me. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said finally. But you were an adult, Evan. You had choices every single day. And every single day you chose to betray me. He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. I know I did. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table for the coffee I hadn't ordered. Then I stood and looked down at the man I had once promised to love forever. I forgive you, I said. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to let go. I walked out of that coffee shop and never looked back. 6 months later, I bought a small house by the lake. It was the kind of place I had dreamed about as a child, a quiet retreat with a wooden porch, overlooking the water, surrounded by trees that turned gold and red in autumn. I had never told anyone about that dream, had kept it locked away in a part of myself that my family never touched. Now it was real, and it was mine. My promotion to vice president was announced the same week I moved in. I did not call my parents to tell them. I did not post about it online where they might see. This achievement belonged to me alone, earned through years of work and sacrifice, and I refused to let them diminish it with their grudging acknowledgement or their inevitable requests for money. I joined a support group for women who had experienced emotional abuse from their families. We met every Tuesday evening in a church basement, a circle of women with stories that echoed my own. Daughters who had been scapegoated, sisters who had been pitted against each other, mothers who had been manipulated by their own parents. For the first time in my life, I met people who understood what it felt like to love a family that refused to love you back. I no longer felt broken for being different. I felt seen. One evening in early autumn, Aunt Ruth called. Her voice was warm and steady, the same voice that had whispered the truth to me 26 years ago in a hospital waiting room. I'm so proud of you, Taryn. I've been following your journey from a distance, and I want you to know that. I stayed silent for too long because I was afraid of what my sister would do, afraid of losing my family. But you showed me something important. You showed me that it's never too late to speak the truth. I felt my throat tighten. You were the only one who ever believed me, Aunt Ruth. When I was 10 years old and everyone was telling me it was my fault, you were the only one who said otherwise. I didn't just believe you, sweetheart. I saw you. I saw that little girl carrying blame that was never hers, still trying to love a family that wouldn't love her back. You deserve so much more than what they gave you. You always did. For the first time in months, I cried. But these were not tears of grief or anger. They were tears of release, of finally being seen by someone who mattered. A year after my divorce was finalized, a card arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. A baby girl about 8 months old with Evan's eyes and brown hair that curled softly around her ears. But her smile reminded me of something else, someone else. It reminded me of myself in the old pictures from before the swing accident, before guilt became my constant companion. On the back of the photograph, 2 words were written in Shannon's handwriting. Her name is Ruth. I looked at that picture for a long time, sitting on my porch as the sun set over the lake. I did not know what Shannon meant by sending it. Maybe she was trying to make amends. Maybe she was easing her own guilt. Maybe she was reaching out in the only way she knew how. I did not need to know her reasons. I placed the photograph in my desk drawer next to her letter, not thrown away but not displayed. Perhaps someday I would take it out again. Perhaps someday I would be ready to respond. Perhaps not. That evening, as the last light faded over the water, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from my mother, just like every month. I glanced at the screen for 1 second, saw the preview of her words, and set the phone back down beside my tea. For the first time in 36 years, I felt no urge to answer, no guilt, no anger, no obligation, just the quiet peace of a woman who finally understood a simple truth: I never owed anyone my happiness, and I never will again. Taryn's story reminds us of something we often forget in the chaos of family obligations and inherited guilt. We do not owe anyone our peace. We do not owe anyone our happiness. And we certainly do not owe anyone a debt that was never ours to carry in the first place. For 26 years, Taryn believed she was responsible for her sister's pain. She believed that one moment on a broken swing had defined her worth as a daughter, as a sister, as a person. Her family reinforced that belief every single day, using her guilt as a tool to extract her money, her time, her energy, and eventually, even her husband. They built an entire system around her shame, and she spent decades trying to pay off a debt that never existed. But here is the truth that Taryn discovered. The people who truly love us do not keep score. They do not remind us of our failures every time they need something. They do not manipulate us into believing we owe them our entire lives because of a single childhood mistake. Real love does not come with conditions. Real love does not demand sacrifice in exchange for affection. Taryn's mother spent decades building a narrative that served her favorite daughter. She twisted the truth about a broken swing to create a lifetime of obligation. She planted seeds of guilt in Taryn's heart when she was just 10 years old, and she watered those seeds every single day for 26 years. But she did not stop there. She encouraged her son-in-law to get close to Shannon. She created opportunities for them to be alone. She orchestrated a betrayal that was years in the making, all because she believed that Taryn's success belonged to the whole family rather than to the woman who earned it. Think about that. A mother who would rather destroy her daughter's marriage than allow her to keep what she had rightfully built. A mother who saw her child's hard work not as something to celebrate, but as something to redistribute to the child she favored more. This is what toxic family dynamics look like. Not always loud and obvious, but quiet and insidious. A comment here, a guilt trip there. A lifetime of being told you must do more, give more, be more, just to deserve a place at the table. But Taryn refused to accept that narrative any longer. She gathered her evidence. She found her voice. She stood in that courtroom surrounded by people who had spent her entire life telling her she was wrong, and she spoke her truth. And when she did, everything changed. Not because she was cruel or vindictive, but because she finally believed that she deserved better. The most powerful moment in Taryn's journey was not the courtroom revelation. It was not watching Evan's face go pale or Shannon crying real tears. It was much quieter than that. It was Taryn sitting on her porch, the porch of the lakeside home she had always dreamed of owning. It was the sunset painting the water in shades of gold. It was her phone buzzing with another message from her mother, and Taryn feeling nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desperate need to respond and make everyone happy at her own expense. That peace, that freedom, that quiet knowing that she no longer owed anyone her happiness. That was her true victory. Some of you watching today know exactly what Taryn felt. You know what it means to be the family scapegoat, the responsible one, the one who is always expected to give more, forgive more, sacrifice more. You know the exhaustion of loving people who take and take without ever giving anything back. If that is you, I want you to know something important. You are not alone. There are millions of us who have carried guilt that was never ours, who have tried desperately to earn love that should have been given freely. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cold for protecting your peace. You are not a bad daughter or a bad sister for finally saying enough is enough. You deserve a life that belongs to you. You deserve to be loved without conditions, without scorecards, without the constant reminder of everything you supposedly owe. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of Taryn's journey resonated most with you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who made you feel guilty? Have you ever discovered that the debt you thought you owed was never real? Have you found your own moment of peace when you finally let go? Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. And this community we are building together matters more than you know. If you have not already, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Every subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, no matter what anyone has told you, no matter what guilt you have carried, you never owe anyone your happiness. You never did, and you never will. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You deserve it.